Much, Kimberly. I'm thrilled to be back again, teaching for Keela. I love the work that you all do. As Kimberly said, I am Beth Brodovsky. I am the president of Iris Creative Group. We are a 25-year-old brand focus agency that specializes in nonprofit communications. We also lead classes for nonprofit communicators every single month through our nonprofit toolkit program, helping everyone whom we lovingly call slash marketers, all of you guys that are out there with doing all the things that are related to marketing in your toolbox, whether you were trained to do them or not. Our goal is to help you feel like you can market like a pro. We also have a podcast that we did for 5 years that has 200 episodes out there that's free and talks all things related to marketing communications, and specifically, how do you get people to move from attraction into action? So there's some great resources that we have available to you as we talk through logos today. At the end, I'll be sharing a little tool that I have for you that after this class, the folks at Keela are going to be connecting me with you so that I can send that out to you directly as well. So we're going to jump right into talking about logos today. And this is one of my favorite topics to talk about. It's pretty much one of everybody's favorite topics to talk about. So when we're talking about logos, you may think of the organizational brand, your main logo, the logo that you use to identify and communicate your organization. But it may surprise you to know that you may actually have more logos in your organization than you think of, or that you may have the availability to have more things that you could use a logo with that could potentially benefit your organization. So think about things like your programs. You have annual funds and societies, some of you might have events. There might be all kinds of different things. It's of course my campaigns. I'm like my little box is covering up all of my details over here. You might have an anniversary coming up. And you might have, if you're a school, you might have a team or a mascot. And so in an organization, it's often surprising. There's all these different things that might already have logos, some of them, all of them, or there might be places where you haven't thought about it that you could use a logo. But in addition to that, there's your strategic plan. Sometimes people create a brand around their strategic plan. And then all of these things, in addition to being individual logos, they all have relationships to each other, whether you've really thought that through or not. And so that's what often happens when it comes to utilizing logos in your organization. Sometimes you're an organization that already has existing different programs or segments or parts that already have their own logo, and you're kind of trying to gather them all together. Sometimes you have the opportunity to think things through from scratch. So we're going to be talking about the different ways that logos and logo systems can grow and be built so that they can actually support the work that you do. So what makes a good logo? This is one of the biggest things that people ask me, like, how do you know what a good logo is? And of course, I have to tell you, good is relative. Is a logo good because it's designed well? Or is a logo good because of the marketing that you do that actually is around that logo? A lot of times people talk about, there's a famous story around the Nike logo. You can see it here on the screen, that little Nike swoosh that's now gotten to the point where you can see that little swoosh and you know that it's like Nike. Well, the thing is, that logo didn't start out like that. It's an evolved logo that came along over time. And it's really Nike's marketing and all of the money that they've put towards building your familiarity and your recognition of that logo that's really made that become such a strong, iconic image. But as you can see here, there are some logos where there's words that are encapsulated in a shield. There's logos where they kind of added little nuance onto the typography. There's logos that are just pure type. There's all different types of formats for logos. But when you think about what makes the icon of any style that you're using really valuable for your organization, I really think it comes down to 5 things. Number 1, does your logo represent who you are today? That's really important. So, you might have a logo that's been around for a long, long time. That doesn't mean it's bad. It doesn't mean that it's good. It doesn't mean that your logo is dated or needs a refresh. Maybe, but does your logo represent who you are, from the work that you do to the message that you're trying to communicate to the style and the visual impression you want to be giving people in the world? Does it position you well against your competition? Are you aware of your competition? Do you know the people that if they don't choose to participate with you or they don't choose to give to you, where are those dollars or that time going? Maybe you're a membership organization. Maybe you're a school. Maybe you are a charitable organization that maybe you're an organization that makes a lot of money through events. What are the people that, what are the other choices that people have? And it's worth thinking about, no matter how unique and special you believe that your organization is, there's always competition for that time and that money. Is your logo helping you? It's not a functioning in a vacuum, but does your logo help attract exactly the right people? Is your organization attracting exactly the right people that you're looking for? And if you're not, how may or your logo be impacting this or may not? Is your logo at all a factor in whether or not you're attracting the kind of people that you want? And once you've attracted the right people, the kind of people that take the action that you need them to take at the frequency that you want them to do it, are those right people able to remember you and understand you? Does your logo, when they see it, help them build that visual connection? It's a hook to your brand. Your logo isn't your brand itself. Your brand is everything from the experience that they have all piled up to the impressions that they're creating. But does your logo help give them that little visual reminder that's building up that positive impression that makes them remember you and understand you the correct way, the way you want to be understood as an organization? And ultimately, does it make it easy to use in all the ways that are needed? So sometimes all those other factors, it's a great branding tool. People love it. It works well visually for your audience. But when you flip it around and think internally, how easy is it to use your logo to do the things that you need to do today? A lot of the you know ways we need to communicate now are by using an avatar, which is often a square image for social media. Is your logo conducive? Do you have a version of it that works well in the restricted formats where you want to market? On the flip side, in the ways that you market internally, is it easily editable? I can't tell you how many times we've done invitations or things for people and we get a collection of logos and they all have that like white box behind it because all there is a JPEG graphic means that it's not transparent, and we end up having to design something with a white background so that the logos don't look ugly on it. You may not have a version that you can print white on a dark background. It might be fuzzy or old or scanned or out of date, or you might have a very vertical logo and you're finding that in today's marketing you really need something much more horizontal. So when you think about when you're trying to use your logo and put it on things, do you end up getting frustrated and having to make compromises in your marketing in order to do the things that you need to do? So these are some things to think about. So those of you that are here today, how would you rate yourselves on that scale? Do you feel that your logo is doing a good job today against these different things? And if not, where are the gaps? What do you think? What do you struggle with the most when utilizing your logo? It's a good thing to think about. So pop your feedback into the chat box. What's going on? Why are you here today? What kind of things, what questions do you have? All right, so I'm going to keep moving as people pop into the chat and let me know what they think. And we're going to dig into this a little bit further. I'm going to show you some examples of all of those different things that we just shared, your organizational brand programs, and the different ways that you can or utilize logos. So this is these are examples of organizational brand logos. So they are the main logo, the top tier, the parent logo, shall we say, of different organizations. This is the Del Art Museum, North Star Museums and Education, Histiocytosis. And these are actually all redesign projects that we did with organizations because the logos that they had were not working for them. So when you think about a logo, this is the top logo. Now, programs. When you think about programs, organizations have lots of different programs. So take a look at what we have here. So this is an organization. We did the one on the left. So what happened was over time, this organization had more and more and more programs. And so when you look at on the left, this parent organization, and you look at all of the sub programs that are part of their ecosystem, what does it make you think when you look at it? Is this great? Do you love the fact that they're all unique and that they're all totally different from each other? Or when you look at it, do you think, wow, this is a lot of chaos. I would have no idea that these are connected to each other. It's really interesting to think there's different ways that you can read a wide variety of logos like this. So here's a couple of things I want you to pay attention to when you look at these. So a lot of them, the organizations, they have a lot of words. So look at all the words that are in each of these logos. These are long program names. So when you're thinking about your program names and the logo you use to represent it, a question I would want you to ask of your organization and yourself is, do all of the words that are the name of this program need to be part of the logo, part of the graphical element, the graphical part of the logo? Or can they be separate? By trying to include all of the words of the name of a program into the main logo, you can see just how small and how complex logos get. I mean, I would love to be able to say to you, see if you can go back and convince somebody to rename that program something shorter and more concise. But I also understand how much control the marketing team usually has of that. Usually not that much. And sometimes you're bringing in an existing program. There's not always a lot of control about that, but you can control how you visually represent it. You can control how complex your fonts are. If you look here, every piece of typography, the fonts, every type design is totally different. There's no continuity, there's no consistency. So what ends up happening is that each of these logos end up looking like completely individual, unique organizations. Now, those of you that might have complex organization might recognize this feeling, because a lot of times what happens is that the person that's running that program, it's like they're running their own little fiefdom. They have a lot of control over that program and they want what they want. So it can sometimes be hard to make changes to make a program look like it's part of an ecosystem. So that can be really difficult. But when you have things that are all different, one of the reasons we started to create a new logo for the parent company is what they were saying was, we're doing all of this great work, and it's not the individual parts are not amounting to as much as they could. The word for that is there's no synergy. So synergy literally means that the individual parts, when put together, add up to more than the sum of the parts. The whole is greater than the individual parts. When you go for an approach where the individual logos are taking the lead, it's very hard to create synergy. Now, conversely, we're going to look at something totally opposite. This is, I live in Philadelphia. This is the University of Pennsylvania. Chances are where you live, there are lots of different colleges and universities. One of the trends in the higher education world has been to rein in all of that individuality that you just saw in the previous example. Many colleges and schools started out with, the Stroud College of Engineering, or, in this case, the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. But locally, I'm in Philadelphia, Wharton is just thought of as Wharton. I mean, we all know it's part of the University of Pennsylvania, but Wharton as a school has a very strong brand identity of its own. And that was true with a lot of the colleges and a lot of the universities. And each of the different programs, each of the different colleges often had its own logo, its own name that was like the top of the list. As you can see here, Wharton has its own name. But Penn decided strategically, they believed from a admissions perspective and also from a fundraising perspective, that they would be a stronger entity if they changed how they represented themselves to the world. And if the Penn message, the Penn look, the Penn logo took the first seat and was the dominant message that was coming through their logos, and that everyone had to fall into a kind of a logo ecosystem. Now you can see here, there's still some variability. So that, the main logo says Penn, then underneath of it, it says the University of Pennsylvania. Sometimes they use the logo by itself with a ribbon underneath of it. Penn Nursing looks a little bit different than Wharton, then looks a little bit different from the graduate schools. But if you take them as a whole, they feel like a family. And this is an important thing to think about when you're expanding beyond one logo. When you have one logo, you don't have to think about this. But as you think about branding your individual aspects of your organization, you want to think about this is what's called logo hierarchy, visual hierarchy. How do your individual images relate to each other? Are they relating as parent-child? Are they relating as siblings? Are they relating as cousins? Or are they relating as distant strangers and a collection of random people in a room? And the thing is, there's no wrong answer and there's no right answer. What ends up being wrong is when when these things evolve on their own organically with no decision, and you end up in a place that isn't healthy and doesn't support your goals and your strategy. So that's what's important to think about as you evolve your program designs. Campaigns. So campaigns are another thing that often gets a brand, a logo, or an identity of its own. There are lots of different types of campaigns. This is an example of a Giving Day campaign. So this was a Giving Day that we created for, this is a private school up in Rochester, New York. And we were able to use their main logo, which I'm going to show you later, this as part of its overall ecosystem of logos. But for now, I want you to think about, so do you do a special fundraising campaign, whether it's a Giving Day or not? You may have some other type of a fundraising campaign that you do. You might have a capital campaign. Lots of people, when they're ready to do something big, a capital campaign or a capital campaign is specifically often related to like building a building, like a physical capital campaign. It might be an organizational campaign, something to fill up or create a pool of money to do different initiatives. You might be an organization that does advocacy. And so you're creating an advocacy campaign. Imagine something like Smokey the Bear and the idea of stomping out forest fires. They went beyond just creating a logo into creating a mascot or character for that was a brand focus for the message that they were trying to create. And also other types of issue awareness. You might be wanting to do a toothbrushing campaign, or today, a very good example of that is what's happened with the Black Lives Matter messaging. That obviously was from more of a grassroots group, but how that message has evolved over time. That's an example of an issue awareness campaign. Events. So there are all kinds of different events. Events are a really interesting thing about branding. One of the things that we see is sometimes an event, the look of the event is its own thing. So it might be a unique event that you're having this year, and that's it. The minute the event is over, there's a completely different look. It's tough to create continuity for that event when it's totally different every single year. On the flip side, if your event looks identical every year, sometimes people can feel constrained by that. It's not festive enough. There's no ability to add a theme or something about what we're focusing this message around. So say your event is a race and it's a race for the cure. It's a big thing around here, race for the cure. Having that look the same every year, it's time this year for this race, it's time this year for this race. Having it look identical can bring a lot of value, versus whether it's your spring gala and every year you want to have a different theme. One year it's Moonlight in the Garden. The next year the theme is, Grow Together. And you want to be able to communicate the specialness, the funness, the uniqueness of this event each year. So this is an example of a way that you can kind of bridge the gap with the idea for an event. So this is an organization called the Philadelphia Education Fund, and they have annual awards that are called the Eddie Awards. They could have just made a logo for the Eddie Awards on their own, but what they did that I think is very interesting is they created a look for the Eddie Awards that can be used on its own, but it also can be linked in with the logo. When you connect things together like this in a logo, it's called a lockup. And so they connected it all together, and you can see this one's from 2013. And this wasn't an accident. I actually purposely pulled something really old so that you could see that even when something is really old, when you've got this standardized look, I mean, this may look a little bit old, but it allows you to take that look and say it's 2013, it's 2014 to signal the newness of it. And it also let us create an option that we could integrate the logo that includes the organizational logo, the events logo in with a theme. Without doing it as a lockup, it can end up getting really cluttered. You know, where do you put the organizational's logo? Do you put it on the front? Do you put it on the back? What takes precedence in visuals? What's the hierarchy? What's the dominant, subdominant, subordinate that you need to make something look interesting? So this is an important thing to think about when you're having a logo. I'm going to be showing you anniversary logos in a few minutes too. And this is an important discussion to have. Does your logo, your organizational logo, always stand alone, or is there value in connecting other types of images into your logo that you use for a period of time? Development funds. This may be an area that you might not have even thought about. So you have an annual fund, and obviously you fill your annual fund every year if that's something that the way that you fundraise. So lots of schools have development funds, but you might have a circle of friends, you might have a giving society. There's lots of things that sort of communicate a group of fundraisers or an initiative around fundraising. So this school always has had an annual fund. They do well, but they really wanted to expand their focus on the annual fund. And they also wanted to expand their giving opportunities. And so the school has a crest that has an acorn and a leaf in it. You saw something from the school a minute ago where we had the giving day that used the acorn. And so when they asked us to come up with a logo for their fund, we thought about, well, what is the purpose of a fund? It's the roots, it's the foundation, it's the seminal thing that kind of gives and keeps giving. Well, if we're dealing with an acorn as their symbol and a leaf as their symbol, we use the tree. So the tree symbolizes sort of the foundations, the thing that's needed for everything else to grow. And in this case, the leaves are blowing across the words, because the one image that they shared with us is that they wanted to say, we want a logo that says, this is the thing that we use that goes out across the year to support all of these individual initiatives. So that was why we chose the visual this way. The other thing that you may notice is that there's 4 different versions of it. Well, normally I would say that's crazy. You don't want to do 4 different versions of a logo. We're not Google that can just, randomly put different logos up. But the reason we did this is they wanted to very strategically anchor moments of giving into each season of their school year. And so we use the idea of a tree and the fact that a tree changes color throughout the year and loses its leaves to kind of give a visual hook to the increase in frequency of giving. When you're increasing the frequency of your asking, it can sometimes be uncomfortable. So by supporting it with this logo structure, it helped them make sense and tell a better story around their giving, around their asking story. And so this is an important thing to think about. Is your logo just a logo and a visual hook, or can your logo be used to support initiatives? Anniversary logos. So if you've existed for more than a year, you're going to have at least a 1-year anniversary. So I kind of have a love-hate relationship with the whole concept of anniversaries and anniversary logos. I personally am not a big one that believes that you should be marketing around how long you've been in existence. I personally believe that is one of the weakest hooks. It's kind of an outlier reason for somebody to give to you. No one's going to give to you or necessarily even join your organization because you're the oldest. If you're not delivering value today, it does not matter how long you've been around in theory. However, I know that boards and executive directors love this. Sometimes donors and communities and memberships love this. So the thing is understanding what is the value of doing it. I would always encourage you to ask yourself and ask your community, so what are we doing here? Are we putting a decoration? Are we adding something onto our logo, changing everything out for the year? And is that it? Or is the idea of utilizing an anniversary logo a symbol of something that we can do, a symbol of change, in the same way a rebrand is often a symbol of change? So I would encourage you to think about, why are you doing an anniversary logo? Is it worth the headache of putting a different logo on every single piece that you create for an entire year? And if so, if that's true, if it really is valuable, then what's the best way for you to do it? So here's 3 different examples. So you can see on the top left, we've got the resources for human development. What they did is they created a stacked version of the logo. Look right in the middle on the top row. It's a stacked version of the logo. And then next to it, they put their celebrating 50 years and counting. So they did what's called a lockup, not unlike the example I showed you for the events, where the Philadelphia Educational Fund linked the Eddie Awards to their logo. So now they use this little lockup on the bottom of their email signature on every single email that every single person in the organization sends out. And they're putting, I mean, in addition to putting it on the events. So it can be a good reminder that you are here, you've been here, you are an experienced player in the field. But I have to say, that's only valuable if all of your other communication supports that story. If it's just a random, hey, we're 50, it's a lot of work changing everything over from possibly limited impact. Looking below that, we've got Chestnut Hill College. So now what they did is they kept their typography and they swapped out their crest. So on the left, they have this crest. It's classic. It's with their griffin that has been updated through the years. And for their 95th anniversary, they exchanged the crest for a 95th anniversary version of their crest. So that's another way that you can approach an anniversary logo. And the third way that I would have you look at it is the simplest way. A lot of times people take the logo that they have and they just put some sort of a little banner or ribbon type of a graphic along it that says celebrating 40 years, 50 years, or whatever your anniversary is that you're celebrating. So does anybody have any questions on any of those? As we're going through, I think this is the last one that I have an example of. So if you have any questions about any of those types of logos, we can pause. And Kimberly, if we do, please jump in and let me know if we should take a break and answer any questions. So this one is really very much directed towards schools in theory. But as I mentioned before, if you have an advocacy campaign, having a mascot or a character can sometimes help change minds. Maybe you're trying to get kids to brush their teeth. Maybe you're trying to get hikers to not start forest fires. Another issue that's happening in the world right now, especially with the world of schools and teams, is ethical issues around the images that were chosen at the founding of these organizations. So a lot of organizations are going through a process right now where they're reevaluating the appropriateness of the icons, the imagery, or the mascots that they're using. So if you're an organization that perhaps is using Native American or Indigenous people iconography, that may be something that some of the people in your community are starting to question. This is a good time to have those conversations. There's a lot of dialogue, a lot of support for that dialogue around there. And so schools are really starting to consider that. So I would say, I didn't put this on my list of the top 5 reasons to change your logo or to think about a logo, but a logo that has become problematic for your community kind of fits into the number 1, does this logo still represent who we are today? So this issue fits into that category. So this is a school, it's Unionville High School, and they'd previously had an Indian name and an Indian literal, and I'm using the word Indian because that's what it was. So and they decided that just was not appropriate anymore. And they went through an entire process of figuring out what it should be, and they changed their mascot and the name of their teams to the Longhorns. And so we helped them develop a new image, a new character for them. And they jokingly, if anybody's a fan of the Zoolander movies, they jokingly call the new Longhorn Blue Steel because of the expression on its face, which, brings some fun into the process. So once you've got all these different logos, maybe you have decided to create some of these things. This is where you have to start thinking about, how do you want to express yourself? What is that logo hierarchy. So in this case, the thing I did not show you before was the Harley School's parent logo. Their main organizational logo is the Harley School at the top of the page here. And they use a very traditional shield that has an acorn and an oak leaf on it. And so what we're trying to do is make all of the sub logos, the sub brands for this school feel like they are part of that family. Some of them are closer, some of them are more like children, some of them are a little further away and they feel a little bit like cousins. But we've made some conscious decisions around what's appropriate. If you can see on the left, the Heart of Harley uses a little bit more of a fun font. It's not one of their two core fonts, the sans serif in Thankful or the serif font that's in the Harley School logo, but it's the entire use of the Heart of Harley logo is on social media. And so to stick with the rigid look of the school didn't feel right to us. It didn't feel like it was expressing their brand. So we added a little softness, a little fun, a little bit of a more lighthearted font for that logo, but we kept in the color scheme. The colors there happen to be the colors of each of their schools. And we used an acorn. In the Thankful logo, we went with a little bit more of the traditional colors out of their palette, and we used a more traditional color, and you've already seen their annual fund logo. So if you get to this point where you have a logo that's important to you, how you're representing yourself in the world, and it does not matter if you have one logo or if you've decided to create a hierarchy of logos. One of the most important things about utilizing a logo is making sure that it's consistent or that you have made decisions around where it doesn't have to be consistent. That's a lot of the times that logos get into problems. So you have a logo that you might have gotten created, and all of a sudden you need to put it on a mug. Well, the mug maker doesn't have the CMYK value or the PMS color that you need to print it in. And so they pick like the next closest purple. And the next thing you know, a new marketing person comes in, they grab that mug, they call the mug company and say, what color purple did you use? And that's how you get color migration, style migration. Oh, we had to change this, we had to change this. And over time, your brand breaks down. So creating a style guide is a really great tool for when you're sharing your logo uses with, say, somebody like my firm, like we're new, someone starts working with us. The first thing we ask for is, can we have your style guide? We want to know what the parameters are, what the rules are, what the colors are, what the fonts are, so that we can help take you from where you are forward and not have it kind of wander around and go backwards. So the things that you want to put in a style guide are the different versions. What are the ways that you've decided to use the logo? Have you created a square version for your avatars? Do you have a more formal version? Do you have preference for which version is used? Is one your primary logo and one is your secondary logo? Becoming clear on what those things are will really help you share your identity with partners, and it will also help for the day that you win the lottery and decide that you're going to move on from your job, to help that continuity for your organization. You want to have some decisions about how the logo can be used. This is always my favorite page. We call it the Don't Taunt the Logo page. But this is instructions on what not to do with the logo. If you're utilizing the logo in, say, for example, a program like Word, it's very easy to grab that box that a logo is in and stretch it or skew it or angle it and really make it look weird. Or sometimes people drop out fonts and put their own fonts in or put it on crazy backgrounds. So this is some directions to say, this is how we want our logo to look. To define the colors. Sometimes you have to make adjustments or accommodations because of a way that a color has to be represented. When you're choosing your color for a logo, if there are a lot of circumstances in which you need to use one specific color, we would call that a PMS color or a Pantone matching color or a spot color. There's a lot of names for the same thing, but it's sort of like, we're going to print something in one color, we're going to crack open a can of ink, pour it into the slot, and it's going to be printed this color. Full color, CMYK, cyan, magenta, yellow. K means black, I know, but it does. Full color colors and PMS colors don't always match up perfectly. And so if you choose your color for your logo out of a CMYK color, you're going to probably have trouble matching it in a one color situation. So you want to think about, when you're choosing your color palettes, how are we likely to deliver this? It's always important to think beyond. Look at this pretty logo and it's so cool and I love that color purple. You want to think, are we ever going to have to print this on a mug? If so, do we have the budget to print it in the full color that we always print it in? Or do we need to make sure that we have a good match in a one color situation? This also means you need to think about how many colors there are. If you don't always have the circumstances or the budget to print things in full color, this is something that like nobody really knows. If you have 3 colors, you basically have 4 colors because there's really no such thing as a 2-color printer. So if you have a 3-color logo, your choices are to come down to 2, come all the way down to 1, or to always print it in 4 colors, which may be a budget consideration. So as you're designing and redesigning, you need to really think about it. So Saeed is asking if I can briefly repeat the difference between Pantone and CMYK. Absolutely. So CMYK is what a designer would call full color. If you look here on the bottom left, you see a photograph. To create a photograph, a press or even a digital press uses 4 different color inks: cyan, which is kind of a bright blue; yellow; magenta, which is a bright pink; and black, which is the K for black. Those 4 colors combine to make a full color image. So all of the colors can be made from full color. And I put the air quotes around all the colors. So anytime you're printing a full color image in a press or on a postcard or brochure, you want to be using CMYK format. So see here, we also have RGB format. So Saeed, since you asked, I'm going to go actually even deeper. RGB is on-screen color. So that's your same logo, but translated into colors that can be used for social media posts, your website, graphics, like things like that. Colors that are RGB colors are made up out of light. CMYK colors are made up out of ink, physical pigment. They don't work exactly the same way. This specifically happens, like say, for example, you have a bright green color. Have you ever looked on your screen and there's like a neon, super bright green? A bright green, a screen and light does a beautiful job of making bright green. Ink and pigment doesn't always do a good job. We have a problem sometimes matching the luminosity of an RGB color when you're printing in CMYK. So these things are really important when it comes to your logo, because your logo colors are often the source of the river, right? Like that's where a lot of times the rest of your color palette, everything that you do is going to cascade out from your logo. Unless your logo is black or white, the colors that are in your logo are going to be part of your color palette. So you're going to need to be able to reproduce that color accurately and consistently between screens, traditionally like ink printed materials, digitally printed materials, and sort of I would call them promotional products, like things where you're printing onto a mug or onto a t-shirt or even embroidery. So this is why it's important to not just pick a color, but to look at how does that color look in all the different versions of it. In my ideal world, the best thing that I can recommend to you is choosing a color that that works as well in all the different palettes. So I talked about CMYK, I talked about RGB, Pantone colors. I'll get, okay, Vicki, I promise you I'll get to hex. So Pantone colors, there's the Pantone matching system, and they are, imagine you're buying paints for your kid, or you're buying a box of crayons for your kid. You pull a crayon out of the box and you draw with that crayon, right? The only color you're getting is that color of crayon. And the only way to get a different color is to take one color of crayon and layer it over top of another color of crayon. But each crayon is an individual thing, and they can be mixed together separately, but doesn't always work how you want. But to come up with a blue, you're basically looking for a blue tube of color, and you're going to squeeze it into a printing press. So it's a very specific, it's called spot color, or solid color, RG or Pantone color, or PMS color. PMS stands for Pantone Matching System. Now, hex color, Vicki, what you're looking at here is it's a 6-digit color. Hex colors specifically refer to website colors. They can also be used for any on-screen environment, but web developers, when they're coding in HTML code, a web developer will use a 6-digit version of your color as opposed to the RGB values for that same color. So it's a way to describe a color when writing HTML code. So Vicky and Syed, make sure that please let me know if I answered your questions properly. Okay, so moving on, and then we're coming up here. We've got about 20 minutes left, and so we're going to wrap up in a few minutes with some more questions. So make sure that you line up any questions that you might have. So maybe you're at a stage where you're looking to evaluate your logos and reconsider redoing your logos. An unbelievably powerful tool to do this is a creative brief. See this little worksheet on the side? We're going to be giving you a version of this so that you can run your own creative brief. We have a very long 4-page one, but we've brought it down to kind of the top things to help you begin to think about the answers you want to get from people to be able to do this. So this helps give designers the big picture. You want to know things like, who's the audience? What are your goals? What is your tone? What is your style? It gives you a way to define that style with examples. Here's what happens in the real way when we're talking to clients. Hey, you want a new logo? What do you want it to look like? Well, we want something really clean and modern and sharp. What does that mean? How do I tell a designer what clean and sharp and what does modern mean to you? Modern, do you mean like mid-century modern? Do you mean futuristic? Do you mean sharp and pointy? Do you mean, I saw this thing on this other website and I really like that, please do that. So it's super important to, after you get words that people say to describe what they're looking for, ask for examples. Show me what you mean by that. Who is somebody out there in the world that's doing that, that's creating the style you want or the look that you want? How would you embody, how would you visually represent, what does modern mean to you? It is so helpful, because then you can look at it and go, oh, that's what you mean by that. Or a designer, it'll help show them. So you may be doing this work yourself, or you may be communicating with a designer and you want to be showing them what you mean by what you say. It's a great idea to say what to look for or what to avoid. Many organizations have imagery that's critically important to have as part of their image, or, oh my gosh, do anything, just don't do this. Oh, please don't show us another caduceus if we're a medical organization, or everybody else in our industry shows that, so this is really important. So getting clarity on the imagery that is either appropriate or inappropriate, or imagery that you're like, my boss is never going to approve this. I used to have a boss that hated type turned on its side and going up vertically. And at the time that was super trendy. And so all the designers wanted to make vertical type, and she was never going to improve it. So we finally learned, why waste our time? It's important to really think about that. Okay. So we're wrapping up here with the last couple of slides. On top of what makes a good logo, the second most common question that I get is, how do we know it's time to change? So many of you are with existing organizations. And so it's a big question, do we actually need to change? So here are a couple of things to think about as you're considering whether you actually need to change your organizational logo or any of your other logos. So one reason to change your logo is to telegraph the actual change at your organization. Maybe you have a new leader. Maybe you've written a new strategy. Maybe you've decided to go in a different direction. Maybe people have a poor perception of you or a wrong perception of you, and you've just done some strategic work to actually get that new perception out in the world. And you need something visual to help really kind of, I hate to say it, but prove it, to anchor that change into your community and give them a visual hook so that they really do internalize and recognize the change that you're actually creating in the world. Maybe it's time to level up to be competitive. This is an organization that on the left, this was their startup logo. They didn't really have a budget when they were starting up. They had a friend, I think, do something for them, or maybe they did it on a crowdsourcing platform, but it never really felt like them. They didn't really love it. And they'd evolved and grown as an organization. And this didn't feel like the organization they were today. It felt too immature and unprofessional. And they just felt like the way we're actually acting has evolved beyond our look. And so we worked with them to develop a new logo that they felt represented themselves better against where their competition, and you have to look at that frequently, because your competition may be rebranding, refreshing their visuals. How are they all changing, growing, evolving, and are you getting left behind? Maybe what you're doing is just dated and uninspiring. My favorite story about this logo redesign was when we did in-depth interviews with the community, and I asked them about, like, tell me, about, what do you think of the logo? And they said, I think it's blue. Yeah, I think it's blue. And that was it. Like, that's all they could really say about the logo. They didn't have any attachment to it. They didn't have any detachment from it. It was sort of nothing. And so this was very old. It was, visually it is very dated. The internal community didn't care that much, but it also wasn't helping them. We redesigned it to this more modern version of the logo. And since then, they had a few little products that they sold, lollipops for fun. This is an organization that makes most of their money through volunteer-led fundraisers, and they had products that organizations could buy to sell through their programs. So the amount of things that they're able to put their logo on now that people actually want has skyrocketed. So it's become an actual whole new revenue source for them. And then, I think this is the last one, technical difficulties. You can see the one on the left. Remember, one of the things I said is sometimes you have a logo that has that white block behind it that you can't get rid of. This one had the white block. It was poorly rendered. It was choppy. You can see it was such a poor quality that it did not matter how good the rest of the design was. Putting a poor quality logo on the most beautiful piece brings everything down. It really lowers the level of the work. So we redesigned their logo, but they didn't want to gut it. They wanted to make a small change. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about making small changes in a sec. So so expanding or realigning hierarchy. So this is an organization, North Star, and over time they'd grown into having two really separate service areas. It didn't start out that way, so it didn't occur to them to create a different hierarchy, but they had evolved that way, and they'd reached the point where they had very different audiences for these two separate lines of business that they had. And so they decided they really wanted to separate them into two separate brands with two separate logos, but they wanted them to feel cohesive. In this case, there is no parent logo. They wanted these two logos to feel like equal siblings. And so this is really key. You really want to think about, what is the hierarchy you want to represent in the world? Do you want to seem equal? Do you want to seem hierarchical? Evolution or revolution. So as you can see, the one that I just showed you, for the perinatal cooperative, which is a tough name right there, sometimes it's time to start from scratch. We need a totally new logo. Look at what Animal Planet did. They totally did a completely different logo. Whereas on the other hand, you look at somebody like Starbucks, and you can see over the course of from 1971, so that's, a lot of years, 50, is that 50 years? Yeah. They have slowly, incrementally gone from a mermaid to a mermaid with a circle, to a different mermaid with a circle, to dropping out the circle entirely. That's called evolution. So it's something to think about. Okay, you need a new logo. You need a refresh. You need to change things up. Maybe it's to get it more modern. Maybe it's to communicate something different. How different? Because here's the thing. If you do a revolution logo that looks totally different colors, different fonts, different iconography in your logo, the amount of time, money, and effort it's going to take to reconnect your brand, your organization, your community to that new image is much higher. That doesn't mean it's not a reason to do it, but you need to think about, after the logo is done, what do you got to do? What's the workload and the money it's going to take in order to get this thing embedded in the consciousness of our community? And you have to think about what your capacity is. It's wonderful to say this is what we need strategically, but if it's not executable, it won't happen. That transition will never actually occur. And so 5 questions you need to ask yourself every 5 years when you're thinking about when is it time. Maybe you don't need to, but if every 5 years you look at your logo and say, does it represent who we are today? Does it position us against our competitors? Is it attracting exactly who we want right now? Is it helping those people, those perfect people, understand who we are and come to us for the right reasons? And is this logo easy for us to create marketing efficiently and well? So 5 questions every 5 years, and you may look at your logo at the end of that and say, yep, we're good to go. That's fabulous. Or you may say, not quite. We need an evolution. Or you might say, wow, we've come a really long way and it's time for a revolution. It's very helpful to ask those questions and to just evaluate it so that you can say we're on the right track or we need to make a course correction. So that is what I have for you today. We have a few minutes left for some questions. I will be sending you a little recap of that, a little worksheet of the communication brief document so that you guys can use it yourselves. But in the meantime, Kimberly, any questions that people have?
Thanks, Beth. That was a wonderful presentation. Mary Lou Miller wanted to say thank you for the excellent description referring to your color models. But we do have some questions that came in. We had one anonymous question asking, how do I ensure branding consistency across my team?
Okay, so call me back. I actually have a whole second presentation about that. And it's so funny that you should say that because I did this presentation for someone and that's exactly what came out of it. They said, well, now you need to come back and do this branding cohesiveness across the whole team. But because you're here today, the things I want to tell you is the number one thing. And if you listen to like 5 years of my podcast, you will get this message. But to save you time, the number one inhibitor to making this sort of brand transition to having this branded cohesiveness is leadership buy-in. And I wish I could tell you that it wasn't, but if the leadership at your organization does not support the focus of the brand and the visual direction of the brand, you're going to have a heck of a time moving forward with it because there's always going to be wriggle room. And by leadership, I mean, where's the power? Who do people listen to? It may be the executive director, but it may be the president of the board. It may be an active volunteer. Where do you need buy-in specifically? And how do you build buy-in for the brand across the community? We say you need to have a shared vision strategically. How do you apply that to that logo? So that's not step number one. Step number two is defining your cattle chutes. And by defining your cattle chutes, I mean, how restrictive versus how open are you willing to make your brand? Are you the logo goes on the left, it's blue, don't touch it, don't mess with it. You can put a picture here and the words go here. That's it. Are you super restrictive with your brand? If you do that, sometimes it can be so restrictive that you're going to be standing at the back of a presentation and see rainbow slides because somebody went rogue, right? Because those restrictions were too much. So they just did whatever the heck they wanted. See it all the time. On the other hand, if you don't put some room, some cattle chutes, some space into it, then people can do whatever they want. There has to be some monitoring. If there's no, you don't want to become the brand police, right? You don't want to have to be. But if you're not educating and telling people, here's how you need to use it, and potentially even giving them tools, giving them templates, and this is really the third thing, facilitate what you want, make decisions about what you want, and then make it as easy as possible for people to follow your directions. Put all the logos on an e-drive or whatever, or a Dropbox, someplace easy. One of the other things that we do when we do a rebranding is we create an Excel file, which is a spreadsheet that says, here's the name of the file. Here's what you use it for. So it makes it really clear to say, oh, okay, if I'm trying to put a logo on a mug, I go across, I grab this file. And it makes it so much easier for people to find the files you want. You can make it even easier by doing that as a Google Doc. And when they click on that file, it actually takes them to the place where it downloads the right file for them. So whatever you can do to facilitate things to help your community follow the rules so that you're not constantly correcting people will make will make your life better, because correcting people is bad for your culture, but also it means that the bad thing went out there into the world and is impacting your brand. So you want to guide people in a supportive way.
That was excellent. Thank you for a great answer, Beth. And Toby posted it in the chat that you can check out all 200 previous recordings of Beth's podcast. There's a link in the chat there. And building off of that, I'll ask one last question. What should a logo approval process look like? Should I get donors involved?
Oh my gosh, I love this question. This is such a good question. Okay, number one thing about a logo approval process, and I can tell you this from personal experience. Again, where's the power? And this is, you have to ask this in a deep, deep question, because I cannot tell you how many times we've discovered that the power is in somebody's spouse. So the question you need to find out when you're doing a logo process is there anyone who you're going to be asking an opinion of, who, if they give you a response, can change the course of the project? So if you have a board member who has a lot of power and they're going to go home and ask their spouse what they think, and that board member can say, oh my gosh, we hated it. We once were doing a logo for, it was before we focused on nonprofits. It was for a landscaping company. So it was a landscaping company, and we did this whole design. The guy loved it, showed it to his wife. She hated it, totally changed it, made it all flowers. Oh, okay. We thought we were done. Okay. She changed it. Then he showed the logo to his crew, and his crew was like, we're not wearing flowers. We had to do it 3 times. 3 times, because I back then did not know to ask, who are you going to be showing it to, and is there anybody in that list that if they don't like it, you're going to go back over and redo things? Because as you're doing a logo, the time gets used in the concept, and then more time gets used in design, and by the time you're showing it to people, showing off our perfect decision, there's no time left. Like, there is not time to go back and start over. It's going to cost money. So the number one thing I can tell you is find out where that power is, who has the power to derail a project with their opinion. Number one. Number two, keep that circle as small as possible. We like to create 3 groups when we're doing especially a brand design. One is a working group. So that's sort of like your leadership team. So the first group is really the leadership group. Who are the people that are your project managers? It's usually 1 to 4 people that are your internal staff that are working with the design team on the project. Then we create what we call a working group. So a working group is anywhere from 8 to 12 people that are representatives of your stakeholder community. So they're people that can say, I'm here speaking for the volunteers, and I will go back and take the decisions back to the volunteers and say, and advocate for why we made the decisions. I'm here speaking for the donors. So you're getting a little bit of the voice of different people. When you get beyond that, you're turning it into a free-for-all. But the third group we call the brand advisors, and that could be anywhere from 20 to 150 people that you pull, depending on the size of your organization, that you're using to say, hey, we've made these decisions, we're down to these 3, now weigh in. So that's how I like to use people. Be very careful about free-for-all opinions. If I can advise you all on one thing, do not take logo concepts and put them up on your Facebook page or your Instagram page and say, what do you think? Because people think all different things. They don't have the background. They don't have any of the rationale. They don't have the strategy. They're just like, I don't like pink. So if you're going to respond to every single complaint that every single person has, you're going to end up with a logo and a direction that looks like every single person got a little bit of something. It's going to kind of read like a bill that got through Congress. Basically you're going to end up with something that nobody's happy with. So I hope that's helpful.
Yes, that was awesome. Thank you so much, Beth. I believe that was all of our questions, and we are on time here. So I'm going to conclude our session for today. If we didn't have time to get to your question, or if you think of a question after we wrap up today, Beth will be emailing you all with some materials mentioned in today's session. So I welcome you to ask I'm putting you on the spot here, Beth. I'm welcoming you all to ask any questions you may have via email. So just keep your eye out for that. And thank you again, Beth, for a fantastic presentation.